Good morning, dear participants of summer school, those who made it until the final day. Congratulations. We're having one final day, but with beautiful events, and it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Antti Kanner, who is giving the keynote lecture today. Maybe as some of you know, I am studying in Helsinki Digital Humanities program, and I met Antti when he was teaching a great course on, how would I say, working with text and computational methods. And in that course we learned that there are things beyond sentiment analysis and topic modeling. I'm aware that some of you have just heard about these methods and are excited, but I wanted really to invite Antti to tell about how in real research, because Antti is also a postdoc researcher, sometimes these out-of-the-box methods are not enough, and what are Antti and their colleagues doing in Helsinki to overcome these limitations. Antti, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you for the organizers for having me here. It's a pleasure and an honor. My talk will be mostly based on my experience in working with digital methods, teaching digital methods, and failing with digital methods. Most text mining research, regardless of level, whether from student projects to published research in digital humanities, relies much on these three families of methodology. And I will be mostly talking today about topic modeling and word embeddings. But much what I'm about to say also concerns, to some degree at least, to sentiment analysis. We have in Helsinki run a digital humanities hackathon for now 8 years. It's an intensive 10-day project course, international project course, where students of all levels from bachelor to assistant professor level join in groups and work on some specified data and problem setting. And when most people come there, whether they have a background in digital humanities, computational methods or not, their first intuition to approach any problem is to use topic modeling, word embedding, or sentiment analysis. And there is nothing wrong with any of these methods, besides maybe some uses of sentiment analysis. But the problem with them is that oftentimes the results of these methods then, when the practical side of the research is done, for some reason seems to be hard to make sense, or the results are misleading and seem unreliable for some reason. And these difficulties don't seem to much correlate with the researchers' understanding of the statistical or mathematical foundations of these methods. The problem seems to be a little bit somewhere else, because professional data scientists or computer scientists or statisticians seem to bump into exactly the same problems. And what I mean with the hard to make sense part, for example, we can have a problem that is, all of these are based on things I have been personally involved with. For example, we can use word embeddings, word to vec type of vector space semantic model to track conceptual change. Many historians of philosophy, historians of ideas or conceptual historians, or even media scholars and political scientists often approach the research questions as in terms of conceptual changes and how conceptual landscape in political or philosophical landscape changes. And we did a study of have the concepts of equality and equity, yhdenvertaisuus and tasa-arvo in Finnish, have they become more alike as concepts in news media during the last 20 years when the legislation around these issues drastically changed in Finland. And then we applied a vector space model and we saw there was a fluctuation in the cosine between the word vectors. In word embeddings, you represent a word's behavior in the language data, text data set as a vector, and then often similarities between words are measured as cosines between these vectors. And we noticed that, there's a fluctuation. They grow apart, they come together, then they grow apart again, and then they again become more alike. And what does that mean? What to make of that? And there wasn't a linear, straightforward progression of their drifting apart or coming together in a nice historical narrative, but things flying all over the place. So how should that be read? What does it mean? The second case comes from our effort to tackle alcohol policy in news media in Finland. There was again change in legislation, and we were interested in how was the public debate framed towards moving that shift in legislation around 10 years ago. So, and we tried to do this using topic modeling. In this presentation, I usually use the letters LDA to refer to topic modeling. It's maybe the most common algorithm used for topic modeling, so they're kind of interchangeable in this context, but you could do topic modeling using other things as well, but the LDA as the method for topic modeling is almost as common as topic modeling to do things like this. But the problem was again that none of the topics we were able to generate from the data sufficiently corresponded to our a priori framings. We were interested whether markets, legislation, health issues were the kind of driving the main points of the public debate. But what it produced was something different, something completely other kinds of topics, and some topics where elements of these three were intertwined. And as such, we couldn't make article out of that because we wanted to know whether it were the markets, legislation or health that was the kind of main point in the public debate. Again, we didn't know how to read our results. And third case comes from Digital Humanities Hackathon 2 years ago. We wanted to see how Twitter users responded to Finnish campaign for gender-neutral marriage legislation. And we did a sentiment analysis on the tweets. And we used an externally made sentiment word list. And we saw a kind of 50-50 between positive and negative tweets, so for and against, pretty heated, which was something that fitted well what were the people's preconceptions about the issue, but when we looked at what were the kind of most sentimentally prevalent words in our data, for example, the negative words were police and demonstration and this kind of vocabulary, and it's not straightforward to say that police is negatively sentimental word or demonstration, especially in the context of tweets. Although in very wide huge big data sets, when you produce these sentiment analysis lists, usually police or demonstration might be an indicator of a negative sentiment. How does it actually function in context of singular tweet or text? Not sure. What I mean with misleading here is that this is a point raised by Brooks and McEnery in 2019. You don't have to necessarily read the captions here, extracts. I just put them there to show that this is their research. They evaluated topic modeling as a method for discourse analysis or corpus-assisted discourse analysis, and did so by first generating topics with LDA and then looking at the most prevalent words for each topic and made observations about what kind of discourses or framings or themes or topics there were in their data, and after that they kind of close-read a sample of those texts and tried to see how do the topics and the text, when human analyzer reads those texts, kind of correspond to each other. And what they found out was that when you look at the most prevalent words for topic modeling, you can very easily tell yourself a story. How do these words relate to discourses in the data? And this has to do with the human language capacities to make connections between words. I can give you 4 random words and quite easily you slowly make a story in your head how are these related, what kind of discourse, what kind of idea, what kind of conceptual structure ties these 4 random words together. This is an essential faculty of human language capacity. But when used for analytical purposes, it can be very misleading, and this is what Brooks and McEnery found out, because what they assumed were very coherent, very kind of predictable discourses based on the word lists in their data were basically not there at all, but the structures in the data, the textual phenomena, were related to those words, but not in the way they thought they would be. It was quite different how the text was related to those word lists. And around half of those topics, they seemed very kind of coherent and made sense, didn't actually kind of reside in the data almost at all, or to very small extent. So the point here is that when these methods produce very abstract representation of language use, it is very easy for analysts to read much more in them than they actually are of telling of data. So my argument here, based on, this is not very tightly formed argument, but this is what I'm saying here, is that many of the problems, the unreliability bit, relates to, is a kind of sum of the first two points. When things are hard to make sense and misleading, they become unreliable. My claim is that many of the problems actually result from assigning the method a badly defined or too expansive role in the research data. So we are kind of asking too much from the method. We don't actually know what we are looking for, and we hope that topic model or word embedding will fill in all of the blanks. And if we would take time to see how many blanks we have in our thinking of our research process, we would find out that we basically have nothing more than blanks. We have a very vague idea of discourse, and then we throw a topic model on data, and it will give us discourses as Michel Foucault intended them to be shown in the data, or Norman Fairclough, or someone. My second argument is that if we kind of limit the method's role in the research process, we control it. We control our expectations from it. We control the role the method occupies in the research process, and we only ask them things they can answer. We get actually interpretable results that are not misleading, and as a result are more reliable. But what is required, what do we need in order to assign a method a more reasonable position in the research process is a peculiar or very specific type of knowledge about what the methods do. And I here approach this matter by making a distinction between knowledge how a tool works in mechanical or technical terms versus how to use it. Using a hammer doesn't require that much of engineer knowledge about how hammer is constructed, how does it internally work. But when we have more complicated tools, more complicated methods, the division kind of starts to show up. We have power drill, and we have mechanics, engineering, electronics that control what happens kind of inside the drill. And then we have knowledge of how to use it efficiently. We can quite easily assume that the person who invented the latest electronic motor that is used in the current power drills isn't necessarily the same person who is very adept at fixing things on walls using that power drill, or knowing exactly what kind of anchor do you need, that let alone be an architect or a furniture designer or something like that. And when we rise up the level of abstraction complication of these methods, we have a car. These are, for some reason, very male examples. Sorry for that, but that's why I put a driving lesson with women there. We have a car which is full of all kinds of electronics and combustion engines and electronic engines and whatnot. Very complicated object. But knowing that very, very, very well doesn't necessarily get you from here to harbor in Tallinn. You need something else. You need geographical knowledge. You need to be able to operate the user interface, drive. You need the motor skills to do that, and you need to learn the traffic code. So what I'm kind of driving here is that education, often on digital methods in humanities, focuses very much on the kind of engineering side, the mathematics, the statistics of it. And to some extent, learning the programming interfaces, APIs, or applications to use those methods. But there is less information or knowledge provided on how to efficiently use those methods in research settings. We kind of assume that if you are a professional historian or a philosopher, and then you understand how a topic model works in mathematical terms, you could kind of bridge the gap. But I argue that doesn't actually happen. The questions that rise are actually, what are the topics that the topics model? What are those statistical phenomena? What is the structuredness in the data that the topic model kind of captures? How does it relate to such analytical concepts as topicality, as linguists talk about topicality, or discourses, or themes, or frames, or registers, or genres, and whatnot? And what is the type of meaning that word-to-vec or BERT or other word embeddings captures? How does it relate to analytical concepts stemming from semantics or pragmatics, conceptual history, philosophy of language, and so on? What is the meaning? What is the semantics of distributional semantics? And this, I feel, is a kind of special knowledge on itself, and I have approached this very matter with the help of concept of distribution and seeing all of these methods as distributional operations. In linguistics, as a linguist, I obviously see the missing link between digital humanities methods and research goals as linguistics, but I welcome all of you to position yourselves as the missing link between. Just explaining that my background does explain why I see the matter as I do. In linguistics, distributions are how language allows or enables a linguist item to be used, whether by grammar or conventions or rules related to registers or whatever, however you want to see how language works. And each linguistic item, from phoneme to sound or to words to sentences, has a distribution unique to it. Distributions is a distribution of a word or any linguistic item is like possible routes it can drive to within a certain city, let's say a city. All of the turns it can take, all of the roads it can drive, what the language allows it in a way to do. And then there are different theoretical families of linguistics that define this normative structure a little bit differently, but this is the idea of distribution. And distributional operation is an automated operation that enumerates, organizes, and aggregates distributions of linguistic items. So when we automatically collect all of the occurrences of a given linguistic expression in a data, we put it through some kind of algorithm, and it produces some kind of representation how that specific item, or any item, or all items behave in the data. How are they used in the data? In what kind of linguistic contexts they reside in. And distributional representations are how these distributions are shown as an outcome of a distributional operation. And all of the off-the-shelf text mining methods I see as this kind of distributional operations. So they take language, they take linguistic items, they list, organize, compare, weigh, scale the occurrences, and produce those occurrences in usually some kind of numerical form, either as a singular score or something that relates to other linguistic items. Frequency list enumerates occurrences of linguistic expressions and orders them by frequency. Collocations enumerates co-occurrences between words and usually estimates how over or under represented each co-occurrence is. Word2vec represents each word as a vector of its collocations and uses a neural network to optimize and compress the vector space into more abstract and dense format, smaller matrix that is. And LDA uses a Bayesian generative model to project k number of topics that explain the observed words distributions over documents. If the wording here is unsatisfactory to professional statistician, I apologize. They might be, but this would be roughly the idea what these methods do as distributional operations. And when we seek to capture or think about how do these distributional structures, representations, distributions relate to meaning, we have to start from the idea that there is something in the distribution that is somehow connected to something in the meaning of those linguistic items. In the context of my own research, I have been collaborating much with researchers from fields who have been very interested in very kind of detail level meaning-related stuff. Historians of ideas, conceptual historians, political scientists, and so on, who are and other linguists who are usually very precise on what kind of meaning-related phenomena they are interested in connotations, polysemy, that kind of stuff. But what all this comes down to, using a computational method for text mining for a specific meaning-related thing, whatever that meaning-related thing is actually evaluating or thinking first that whether there is some kind of distributional thing that is somehow connected to a meaning-related thing. And then when we have that mindset of connecting distributions, certain kind of distributional representations with with something related to meaning. We can evaluate different kinds of methods. We can ask questions. What are the meaning-related structures of frequencies, collocations, distributional similarity scores, or topics, or sentiments of sentiment analysis? What does it tell of a meaning of a word that its frequency goes up or down? What does it tell of a meaning of a word that it has a specific list of collocations, and so on? What does it tell of a meaning that it has a word-to-vector close by to specific words? And I have a little bit tried to put this into a workflow. So the number 1 box is observed distributions as they are in the data. And then we have some kind of idea of a distributional structure. There is something in the distribution that is somehow, number 2, connected to the meaning-related structure we are after, number 3. And then the ABC boxes kind of correspond to the presumptions we need to make in order to make or evaluate a specific computational method. First, we have to make a distributional representation that somehow matches or is able to capture our idea of that in the distribution that is corresponding to the meanings. And then we have to presume that there is a level of correspondence between the two and devise a method that turns the observed distributions in representations we can use. But we can use this kind of diagnostic framework to move on the other side. We can investigate specific methods by making it explicit what kind of assumptions we have to make. What kind of assumptions do they project in order to tell what we want them to tell us? For example, with this framework, we can analyze the notion of distributional hypothesis. I don't know, maybe some of you have heard it. It's usually assigned to J.R. Firth. You shall know the word by the company it keeps, but that is a bad reference. It actually comes from Selig Harris. But the idea is that two words are alike in meaning to the extent that their distributions are alike. So the more alike distributions of two words kind of match or correspond to each other, the more likely they are similar in meaning. Thus, the distributional structures are the distributions of two words in their totality and meaning-related structure, the meanings of the words. So it's very kind of generous or expansive way of looking at the distributional structure and the meaning-related structure interaction. When operationalized, these distributional representatives must be then put into form of something that we can compare, for example, vectors and so on. And then when we analyze it using the diagram bit for the correspondence, we are led to questions, are there things we might count under meaning that do not reflect themselves in distributions? So if we make an analogy between meaning and distributions, but we clearly find meaning-related phenomena in use of words that are not reflected in the distributions, they are not captured by the method. Other way around, do the distributions show some kind of structuredness that is unrelated to meanings? So we have kind of possible errors on two sides, and how big we assume these sources of error to be in order to still use the method for the purpose we want them to use. When we notice that word-to-vec cosine between two words fluctuate, we now know that It is the difference between their distribution that fluctuates. It's not the meanings, it's the distributions that fluctuate. The word2vec is about distributions, not directly about meanings. Then we can ask, what is the cause of that fluctuation? In what way are their semantic distinctions fluctuating? What does it tell of the meanings that their distributions seem to fluctuate to some extent? And what happens if our method does not enable this more detailed analysis? If we cannot interrogate it, please be more precise, more detailed. What is happening within that method? And we want to know that detail level. We have to admit that some of the methods do not allow this. Then we have options, different kinds of options. We have choices we have to make. If it doesn't matter, on the other hand, in which way the distributions or meanings are like or different, we are just happy that there is a change, some kind of change in distributions. We can use the method with no problems. To my understanding, the real issue with the use of topic models is not the topic models themselves, but simply the fact that we don't know what produces, how are those structuredness in the data that topic models captured, what are their product, what kind of language use produces them. The whole phenomena from this side of the linguistic analysis is, I think, maybe yet badly understood, and that makes these topic models hard to use. They are usually kind of uncritically used to capture frames, themes, discourses, genres, or registers, and so on. But frames are not themes, and themes are not discourses. Discourses are not genres, and genres are not registers. So how do we assume that if we use a specific method to capture discourses in one data set, it would produce genres in some other data to exactly the same method? It just kind of doesn't seem to make... The topics they produce are kind of similar or comparable, but do we give them too much weight in assuming that they unproblematically reproduce discourses or genres, so on? Because it is not clear what is the meaning-related structure the topics are actually connected to, it is very difficult to understand the results. This is, I think, the key of the problem. And this is not the shortcoming of the method. LDA is a very nice elegant piece of machinery, but simply points to the fact that the topics as distributional structures are not well understood, I think. But we can still, we have context of safe use for these methods, even if they are quite black boxy, like neural network stuff and so on. They are safe to use when the distinctions and structures they hide are actually not relevant. We can use topic models quite safely as a proxy for content variation. If we don't need to know what are the blocks actually there, we can compare different kinds of user groups. For example, in Twitter data, this is from Digital Humanities Hackathon in Helsinki last summer, and we had groups of Twitter users. I think one of these or two of these blocks were identified as bots by bot detection machinery, and we wanted to just see whether these user groups wrote about similar kinds of things. We were not interested in what those things were, we were just interested in whether the groups were distinct or not. And it turned out that there were 4 groups that were almost identical, and then 4 other groups that showed some variation, and we were happy with that. We were not that interested in what was it that they were talking about, just that they talked about different things. Other safe use is we can fit the method in a very modest or limited position in the research workflow, where its shortcomings do not matter, or they are not a hindrance. For example, in the inequity research, we were interested in kind of whose equality or inequality was debated in the data, and for that we needed all of the human or person referencing nouns from the data. And Word2Vec performs quite well with this. Person referencing words, as compared to other words, have distinct distributional features. They co-occur with mental verbs, speech act verbs, and so on, which inanimate animal reference usually don't. But the internal semantic distinctions within that category was not relevant. We were not interested in how firemen were distinct from pensioners. We just wanted to capture all of the human referencing word. And once they were clustered by these Word2Vec vectors, even the long lists we got were quite easy and reliable to extract. So the Word2Vec in this setting didn't actually do much, just very tiny, limited task that it performed quite well. We can also use the notion of distributional structure and its connection to meaning-related structure in thinking about how could we replace a method when it has shortcomings that we actually find important. If we want to see how different registers or discourses are kind of taxonomically related in the data, how close they are to each other, the LDA doesn't help much because it generates an entirely new model with each number of topics. So you would want to know information like, okay, if you generate 2 topics in the data, you get A and B. And when you generate 3 topics, is it the A that splits while the B retains the same, or is there an A, B, and a mix of A and B and or so on? How does this number of topics and kind of granularity of the landscape what kind of landscape does it draw? But could we replace it with something that is able to show this somehow? The distributional structure the LDA is based on is essentially a network of co-occurring words. We can think about it as kind of, if we track all of the collocations or co-occurrences of all of the words in our data, what LDA kind of captures is dense parts of that network. So why wouldn't we just, build a network? Track the co-occurrences, make a network, and use some kind of community detection algorithm to a little bit tackle the same thing. And that's what I did. And this takes a little bit of explanation, but kind of the number of topics or the granularity goes from high to low. All of the pylons are kind of distinct topics or communities, and when the granularity is decreased, they kind of flow into each other. They merge into larger super topics at the bottom line. This is only a fragment of the communities that the method produced in the whole dataset, but these were the two most important in my case. The left, the lighter gray one corresponds to administrative language. And the light gray peak are kind of public announcements in the 19th century Finnish newspapers. And when we drop down the granularity, we kind of see how it merges with different kinds of other kinds of announcement, but also other kind of formal administrative language use. While the dark one is kind of religious language use that is joined by this very kind of romantic literary fiction language use, because the most prominent features of this specific religious community was kind of this very confessional, performative religious language use that had this very key Christian terminology, father, son, love, and so on, and you, I, personal pronouns, and so on, and when you expand on that, you usually capture also these romantic scenes from fiction, where also me, you, love co-occur, then other strong emotions, and so on. Topic modeling is also a back of words type of approach. And it has a shortcoming that it doesn't kind of show how the topic is internally organized within the text anyway. It just assumes that the texts are kind of blind backs of words. But in this other case, we were actually precisely interested in how does the topic flow within a text or discussion. This is online chat discussion data. Especially in free discussion in spoken language, topics usually flow kind of organically and often based on varying association between previous topics. So you don't have a discussion that is about airports, that it abruptly changes to discussion about dogs. You have something that mediates between airports and dogs, for example. So LDA couldn't be used to capture the topical changes within online chat discussion. So we did this kind of lexical chain thing that actually uses word-to-vec associations between words, and what it does, it kind of connects words to previous words that they are somehow associated to, and then kind of makes a chain between them. And these chains then kind of show the organic development of topics within the discussion. For example, here we have an associated chain first starting from lunchtime. Someone says in the online chat room discussion that it's almost lunchtime now, and then it goes to lunch, food, and eat, swallow, cramping, body, and selfie. And then also meal and coffee, and then it continues below selfie, and then the animals getting selfies in hunting cameras, and then it goes to hunting and wolves and making meatballs of deer meat. Someone doesn't like that, and on and on. Also, an important distinction is one between exploration and argumentation. These black box methods, text mining methods, are usually very, very good for kind of preliminary exploration of the data. But you don't have to settle for the their own unreliability. You can use them to make an observation and then devise a secondary research setting or test setting that precisely wants to corroborate or evaluate the finding you have made. You can make very kind of interesting findings based on word-to-vec or topic models, but because they are in this kind of little bit hazy, unreliable, hard to make sense haze, you can bring clarity and light into that haze by making something much more simpler, kind of a test. Often word frequencies are actually quite enough, so with the inequity stuff, we ended up using just word frequencies. We wanted to see whether there was a change in how these words were used in political news media, and the best signal we got out of it was based on just word frequencies. So as a summary, I advocate a research plan that, I don't know if it says on the dolmen topic modeling on a very wavy, heavy boulder on top there, that it's, you can see it's almost falling down. It kind of hangs on there for dear life. It's given too much space, too important setting. I advocate a research plan where the method has more planned, defined, and well-fitting role. It performs a task it is suitable for, and doesn't seem to explain everything as some kind of mythical god machine, which I think this is a primitive attempt at making a all-explaining god machine. Thanks.
Thank you, Antti. I'm looking for the hands first.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I have 4 questions, but I guess I will just start with one more general. When you say distributions, and you already mentioned that it's somehow related to the context for people who are not so much into the thing, distribution, is it the context of the word? And in that case, I guess we are talking about semantics, but can this idea of distributions also be applied to other levels, morphology, syntax, and maybe to more general discourses or something like that?
Yes, originally in the history of linguistics, distribution was a concept that sought to explain how sounds can reside, in what kind of sound environments a certain sound can occur in a particular language. And then it went on to describe morphemes and to words first in a syntactic environment, and then later on to more expansive notion of distribution where not only the syntactic and lexical environment is taken into account, but also things like metadata and topicality and this kind of stuff. But yeah, all of the linguistic expressions, regardless of the level, can be assumed to have a distribution, and the concept of distribution is more complicated and more evasive the higher up you move from sounds or phonemes to discourses or something like that.
So if I may follow up, at some point it felt that you're saying that it can be the situation that meaning is not captured in distributions, and isn't it a controversial thing to say to distributions? And I'm just thinking how it is even possible that meaning is not in distributions, because everything we have is language, and language is distribution. So could you expand on this one?
The distributions that these operations handle have only the sequences of the formal elements, but not their meanings. So what you have to take out of the distributional operations and their outcomes is the very meaning of the word, for example, word. And then the question becomes how much meaning there is in the raw formal sequences when the kind of understanding and communication and interpretation is kind of left out of the machine. This little bit goes back to the thought experiment introduced by John Searle called the Chinese room. But yeah, it's a standing question, and it's a long debate in linguistics whether distributional similarity are all distributional differences of meaning, and vice versa. There is a fierce debate with Chomsky and older generation of linguists in the 60s about this very matter, and it's basically unresolved to my knowledge currently still, because we yet don't have a very strong theory of semantics that would not use distributions either as a priori assumption or kind of descriptive thing. It's a circular or then doesn't enter at all. So it's a good question, and people have been pondering it for 85 years, roughly.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have made a lot of notes, but I have a specific question about the slide where there was a bar chart related to data about communities, and you have labeled, so on the one hand there was literary fiction community and religious community. And this is all very new to me, all this concept of communities, but to my mind, religious refers to discourse, and literary fiction is kind of a cover term for all the literary genres. So what was the term here, the term here that this religious and literary fiction actually refer to? Does it refer to discourse or to genres?
Yeah. The community word here means a community produced by a community detection algorithm in a network. So they are kind of dense area of collocation, huge collocation network. Once I had produced these communities, I evaluated them by looking at those segments of text that had many of the words that belong to these communications, these communities. Each of these kind of lines here on this side represent a word. And then I looked at what kind of language use they seem to be about. And kind of literary fiction community, religious, was just my shorthand to try to describe what kind of language use was it. I was not, at that context, I was not very interested in classifying it in the kind of genre register discourse continuum, but just seeing whether a particular word I was studying at the time was kind of prominent or present in administrative or religious language.
Okay, thank you.
But this is a little bit complicated image that would take maybe 45 minutes to explain thoroughly, but I think it looks nice.
Thanks. I enjoyed your wish to teach people to be more careful interpreting, statistically interpreting natural languages. I think your position is grounded, because sometimes it really happens. Not people don't thinking deep enough about these questions. But just one note. I think sometimes it's possible to keep this information. You are telling that it is missed just in external way as metadata. For example, you had this example where you said that that you know who said it. No, of course you can make distributions, and you can keep information about informants and make separately. So you can still with these classical methods can analyze.
Yeah. Metadata can be kind of introduced in these flows very efficiently many times.
While other people are thinking about their questions, I wanted to share my experience, our experience at the National Library with working with LDA. So we are also exploring how we could apply this for analyzing our historical newspaper collection. And we were very happy, but maybe because our first case study was with very well-behaved corpus, as they call it. So what we did, we took one title, newspaper Latvian Soldier, and we were looking for topics that were related to one particular person, Oskars Kalpaks. He was the first commander of Latvian army battalion and was killed in 1919. And so we were looking at how, we wanted to know and in what context he was talked about later. And we also went through this journey of realizing how safe or unsafe could be these methods and how the interpretations could be misleading. And we used topic coherence scores, and it helped a lot to find out what number of topics were the optimal. And at the end, we realized that, first of all, what was the safe use that was extremely beneficial was that these topics allowed us to distinguish between various meanings of the word Kalpaks, because this is not a very popular surname. It helps. But then there were schools named after Oskars Kalpaks and a bridge. And then we right away could separate these other entities, and it helped to clean the corpus, the data set that we really wanted to explore. And after that, there were quite clear topics about which were the articles about historical events, and then which articles described the festivals that were related to this person, and so on and so on. And while realizing that this was not an end result of our research, we were really happy of the exploratory phase of our research, and we really would recommend this method to our researchers who would come to us and wish to explore our historical newspapers.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a very good example of using a topic model for a task that it fits quite well. There is, I remember a previous study as well that is perhaps slightly related, was a study on Swedish parliament data, and they were interested in this right-wing populist party, how its introduction to the parliament changed the immigration debate. And one of the kind of problems with the topic model is that it gives you a system of topics. And the system of topics can be a little bit difficult, but if you are only interested in one specific topic, you are not interested about the system, you just want to capture a certain kind of strand of language use, content, certain person or immigration or something like that, you just use the topic model to get enough topics that it produces the signal you are after, and you just kind of discard everything else. In the Bayesian statistics, you can introduce a prior to the topic model where it kind of starts from the assumption that these specific words always must occur in the same topic, and starts to build the topic model kind of around that. And I think it functioned, it worked also pretty well in a similar fashion as it seems your case did.
I have a specific question about the lexical chains slide. So you were researching online discussions. I was wondering if that was discussion between two people, would there be less topical shift, and how this topical shift or parallelism of different topics occur? One is online, and maybe how it's related to spoken conversation. Have you looked into it, or maybe you have some hypothesis about it?
I little bit went this fast because I didn't bring a clock. I didn't know how much time I had here. This is an online chat room from Suomi 24, open kind of chat. And it's from the specific group of people for 50 plus, and it's a very, very atypical internet language use in that sense that it's super friendly and nice. There is no aggression, there is there is some disagreements, little bit tensions, but everyone seems to have a kind of social stake in the communication. They don't just, throw a verbal hand grenade in the discussion and bash out. They are very friendly and nice to each other. It's usually around 20 to 30 people at once. The topics flow so that there are usually kind of more than 2 or 3 kind of discussions going on at the same time. In a parallel in a way, and people kind of participate on all of them, so the content is organized in a very funny way if you look at it from the traditional conversation analysis perspective. And one of the research questions actually was here exactly to see how does this kind of technological platform, what does it do to the topic shifts compared to the normal face-to-face discussion. This was done in a collaboration with a conversation analyst. But yeah, there are some differences. For example, how topics start is pretty similar actually to the normal face-to-face communication. But normally in face-to-face communication, a topic is kind of marked to be ending somehow. When something ends, it's usually marked with, okay, that's about it, kind of turn, but here it just dies. It just ends, nothing happens, no one picks up the topic anymore, and so the endings are a bit different, but there is a similar dynamism going on in the initiation of topics. But it's very curious thing. But I'm looking also forward to applying this lexical chain stuff to books and articles and so on, because I thought this was pretty clever. You could see whether there are kind of some recurring strands of argumentation, these associations within, for example, newspaper media.
As I see nobody is having a hand, I wanted to continue a bit on this. I would like to experiment with this myself. But let's say if we have some historical data spanning 100 years, would it make sense to somehow try to slice it in 100 data sets and then apply topic modeling? Will it show some change in time? Does it seem like a sensible method to you?
Do you mean like topic models and time segments?
Yeah, I was thinking, let's say if we just get 100 years of data and treat it as a bag of words, we don't see this time change. But let's say if we split it in different slices, then apply topic modeling.
I think it would be best to use a structural topic model where you can actually kind of introduce the time segments as a parameter to the model to begin with, and that would kind of would probably be the best option.
Oh, so there is something that I don't have to split manually the data set. I just use a metadata of time.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, essentially. Yeah, it's an R library called STM or something. It's usually best way to go, because if you do just topic models on time segments and the models are not related to each other in any way, because the models have some random states within them, it might be very difficult to kind of match topics across the time segments. There might be some practical issues there. But the structural topic model kind of tries to see temporal coherence in the pattern.
I have a question that is going a little bit out of scope of your presentation, but you mentioned Word2Vec, and so I know that Word2Vec is very popular in research communities because it's open source, but at the same time, it's like less powerful compared to bigger language models, and on the one hand, like, is there any benefit to trying to reach out to bigger, maybe commercial language model? And do you see that there are also some very good use cases that would come out of the GPT model? Because mostly we see these great achievements in generating, simulating language, but is there benefit for the analysis, for research? It's not really obvious what researchers could get out of these models.
Yeah. About ChatGPT, not entirely sure, but there has been very good results for research context as well for BERT, B-E-R-T, which is a kind of a development on top of Word2Vec in a way. In Word2Vec you represent word in type level as a singular vector, whereas in BERT you represent each occurrence of a word as unique vector, and this is the architectural breakthrough that enabled ChatGPT and all of the AI AI stuff we are seeing currently. Within, I think, 2 to 3 years, BERT will likely become the mainstream tool not just for word embeddings, but for sentiment analysis and topic models as well. It likely will overtake LDA because I think it seems to perform quite much better. But the problem is, as you said, is the huge amount of data it requires to be trained. And the research is currently going to see whether how much you can use a bird model that is trained on something big, and then teach it just to explain the exceptions that it needs to tackle some different kind of data sets. So whether you can use, for example, a modern standard Finnish bird model to access completely different 19th century Finnish. There are some promising results coming up, but I'm not entirely sure. There was a test, for example, that I think Swedish bird model handled almost 100% Danish and Norwegian as well, because to it they were basically the same language. But we live in very interesting times in this sense, and it's certainly something to, I think, investigate. Not necessarily ChatGPT, but BERT for sure.
But still takes so much more time to train compared to Word2Vec.
Yes, that's very good argument for using. Even Word2Vec is too ambitious for many humanities research settings. If you have a very small, very peculiar data, there is simply not much possibility to train a Word2Vec, even Word2Vec model on it. Then you have to do something even more robust and simple, which is, I think, in many cases, a good thing anyway.
You mentioned that there is a whole layer of knowledge missing between the quantitative data and then the research goals. Do I understand correctly that one of the most efficient ways to solve that is this cooperation with social scientists, political scientists, historians, etc., or there are also some other ways to fill in this void?
Yes, I think what I imply with that is that political scientists or social scientists are professional in reading and understanding the texts they are doing, but they seldom have this kind of linguistically kind of corpus-oriented idea, linguistically analytical view towards the phenomena they are kind of looking at, and they what you need actually is some kind of idea of how the distribution influences or is connected to the meaning, and for that you need to have a conception of distribution of the investigated idea, and linguistic knowledge helps in that, because then you can imagine that, okay, it's a human, it's likely to have mental verbs as predicates, speech act verbs, it's often the subject argument, this kind of knowledge, what the political scientist maybe wouldn't kind of come to think of.
Okay, thank you.
Or where do the collocations come from, for example, and so on.
So, and with that, if there are no other questions, I would want to conclude this session, and thank you so much, Antti. I think it was extremely relevant to touch upon these questions, and I would like another lecture discussing Word2Vec and BERT. maybe some other time, and give a round of applause to Antti. Thank you.